I am not a nautical person. I have not spent any time on a boat per se, but I somehow feel compelled to tell you about anchors, and more specifically, what I've learned about the things that anchor us as we innovate and initiate change. Anchors keep us in place. They provide stability. My colleague here is anchored in her favorite smelly brown mat. Frances, park it. It brings her comfort in unfamiliar settings. It helps keep her in the harbor. We're the same. We psychologically seek anchors. They bring us a sense of stability and comfort. However, the anchor, by its very nature, is intended to ground us and keep us safe. It also prevents us from exploring new horizons. My talk today is my story of pulling up anchor. At the age of 48 and armed only with a dusty PhD, I found myself starting over. I'd not worked as a full-time academic in over 10 years, and as a result, I hadn't optimally contributed to my field. But if there was one thing that I had done right during my time away, it's that I had maintained key relationships. And those relationships, those allies, were able to open a few doors for me, but only this much. I'm Dr. John Tyler Binfet. I'm here today because of my colleague, Frances. I'm not sure what kind of mood she's in today, but we'll see. Frances, come. What's this? Come. Right here. Come here, love. Okay, park it. Listen, Frances, we're working today. We're working. Okay, so down, down. Good. Just stay there and we'll be good. Pulling up anchor involves taking chances and stepping outside convention and taking risks. And I think my biggest risk really is, as already proven, I'm sharing my stage with my colleague here. She is a rescue dog, but I think her sense is that I'm the one who's in need of rescuing, and she's as much a leader as a follower in this relationship, and she has a really twisted sense of humor. In a recent graduate class, she went underneath a table to be pet by a student, only to sneak away and leave the student to pet the hairy leg of a classmate wearing shorts. My talk today is titled Anchors and Allies, and I'm going to tell you about some of the opportunities I've created since rebooting my career. I am the director of a program called B.A.R.K, Building Academic Retention Through Canines, and I bring therapy dogs to campus to support student well-being, to reduce homesickness and stress, and to increase connections on campus. With over 40 dogs in our program and over 60 community and student volunteers, we've helped countless appreciative homesick and stressed university students, and it's with modest confidence that I can say we've struck a chord on campus. It's not surprising that university students would connect to dogs brought to campus. Findings from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada surveys indicate that 37% of Canadian households have dogs. In the broader American context, figures from the American Veterinary Medical Association and the American Pet Products Association vary, but current estimates suggest there are between 70 and 83 million pet dogs in the United States. Increasingly, households with dogs consider their dogs members of the family. This is reflected by consumer spending habits that see pet owners spending on everything from dog clothes to daycare. The positioning of dogs within families is also seen in the role afforded dogs within families, having birthdays celebrated and holding coveted spots in their owners' beds. Research on animal-assisted therapy, a field of study under the umbrella of human-animal interactions, supports this contention that interactions between humans and animals are beneficial. Now, we're not just talking about your run-of-the-mill animal here. Animal therapy relies on animals with unique dispositions and temperaments, calm public behavior, and an eagerness or willingness to work with strangers. Findings from animal therapy might help explain why we find dogs so endearing and consider them members of the family. Interactions between dogs and humans are known to hold potential to optimally impact people's physical, emotional, and social lives. Across studies, animal therapy with dogs is shown to decrease blood pressure and decrease global health complaints in patients. As for the emotional benefits of dog ownership, Broussard argues that a family pet is essential for the mental hygiene of the family, and dogs in particular are known to help keep emotions in equilibrium. Dogs help decrease everything in humans from aggression to apathy. As for the social benefits of dog ownership, dogs are what we call social lubricants. They can be catalysts that connect people to other people. These connections are important for well-being. Dogs decrease inhibitions in people. They help connect people to other people. Frances and I certainly have had our fair share of such chance conversations and interactions. On a recent dog walk back in Southern California, an off-leash dog came up to us looking for a treat. So I turned to the owner and I said, "Hey, can I give her a treat?" To which the owner replied, "Is it organic, gluten-free, and vegan?" Back here on campus, Frances regularly facilitates interactions and conversations, and it was really Frances who helped identify a direction or a risk I should undertake as a researcher. As one does when one settles into a new workplace, one establishes routines. And one such routine was for us to grab coffee, and it was during these trips across campus that I was made aware of a research and community need that hadn't yet been met. Without fail, each time Frances and I would venture out, we'd be besieged by students who, for the most part, would barely acknowledge me and begin immediately interacting with Frances and cuddling Frances. They'd eventually look up and tell the same story. As much as they missed their parents and siblings, family and friends, they missed their dogs the most. Some of these stories were told through tears, and as I listened, I had an idea that the solution to their woeful tales might just be wagging tails. I began investigating ways in which homesick students might be supported through the animal therapy. Now, this is a really exciting time for animal therapy. It was traditionally used in clinical settings such as hospitals, branched out to community environments such as retirement homes, and more recently we've seen a surge in the use of animal therapy in public schools to support reading programs, in courtrooms to provide support to witnesses giving testimony, and even in airports to reduce traveler stress. Despite the widespread nature of dog companions in North America, there still exists an institutional bias against dogs in public places, particularly in the workplace. My job was to figure out how I could provide access to therapy dogs within the context of a university environment, and moreover, as a researcher, how I could assess the effectiveness of this endeavor. Given the feedback I'd received about how eager students were to interact with therapy dogs, and with hundreds of potentially interested students, I knew the standard model of bringing 1 or 2 dogs onto campus wouldn't cut it. I needed to figure out a different way to do things. It's important to recognize that most employers want us to be innovative. They want you to see challenges as opportunities to create something different. They also want us to forge connections that haven't been previously forged. I'm certainly not the first to bring therapy dogs to a university campus, but how I've done it is anything but typical. When you do things differently than how they've been done in the past, you invite the natural suspicions of those who want the ship anchored right where it is. I have to tell you, innovation invites questioning. What are you doing, and why are you doing that? One way to prepare for this as you innovate is to surround yourself with allies, people who share your view of the need for something different. Remember the figures I shared about the number of households with dogs? Well, that worked to my advantage. As the community began hearing about my idea to bring dogs to campus, my allies emerged. One day, after fielding questions from those sort of locked into a dog-free campus, I was feeling more than a little skeptical about my chances of succeeding when, quite literally, opportunity knocked. A university administrator was at my office door asking to hear more of this idea of mine he'd heard about to bring dogs to campus. I launched into an impromptu pitch, trying to sound as if I fully knew what I envisioned, when, without prompting, Frances came out from beneath my desk, went over to this university administrator sitting in his pinstripe suit, and laid her head on his knee. He sort of clutched her face in his hands and said, "Well, what do you need?" I owe a lot to this colleague here. She helped identify a need for therapy dogs on campus, and she helped facilitate connections to key allies. Suddenly, we had funding for a pilot project, but that didn't mean everybody was on board. This notion of surrounding yourself with allies is critical, especially when one encounters opposition. And opposition seemed to find me at every turn. It took me a while to realize that bringing a group of therapy dogs to campus challenged convention, and that the opposition I heard was largely anchored in maintaining tradition. We don't do that here. Dogs are dirty. What about cleanliness? Dogs will disrupt learning. Listen, you cannot have that many dogs in one location. But they weren't the only ones wanting to weigh this project down with anchors. I was a specialist in child and adolescent development. This was relatively new territory for me, and I was struggling with some anchors of my own. Do you really know what you're doing? Are you in over your head here? What if this doesn't work? I was right to question myself. Questions are imperative for innovation. One of my anchors was a belief that I had to do everything on my own. And it took me a while to realize that just as I didn't expect Francis to sort of solve every student's homesickness on campus, why did I think that it was just up to me to sort of solve my own all problems as I launched this program? I needed allies, and as word continued to spread, more and more allies emerged. This spring marks the end of our third year in B.A.R.K, and we now have a feasibility study, a quasi-experimental design, and a randomized controlled trial under our belt. And the results all tell the same story. From pre-test to post-test, students report decreased levels of homesickness, increased levels of campus affinity. Students participating in dog therapy programs report enjoying being at school to a greater extent than students in control conditions. I could talk all day about empirical findings, but I think the voice of students who have been directly impacted by B.A.R.K provide the most convincing arguments that we're on the right track. At the end of every study, I ask participants, hey, what did it mean for you to participate in this study? I was considering moving back home because I was depressed and lacked interest in life. Now I find I am happier, I'm upset less, things bug me less, I'm doing better in classes. But people and the dogs in the program have brought me warmth and happiness and made me think that talking to new friends is not a thing to be afraid of. That social catalyst, social lubricant. Petting the dogs lowered my stress and gave me the only thing I had to look forward to. I hear that a lot from guys who participate in the program. The dog isn't going to judge me if I don't have my English essay done, which was probably the best part of the whole thing. Innovation feeds on itself if you let it. Just as I pulled at anchors of those of others as I tried to launch B.A.R.K, it would have been easy for me to feel that my anchors were being pulled at when volunteers recently questioned providing access to therapy dogs only in a lab-based model. When you create opportunity by questioning the status quo, you create an environment that continues to do that. Questions are imperative for innovation. They encourage us to reflect upon the anchors that might hold us back, and they help us identify allies who will work with us toward a common goal. As a result of questioning, this spring we launched B.A.R.K to Go to provide therapy dogs across campus rather than uniquely anchoring them in the lab. Speaking of anchoring, Frances has been anchored here long enough, and we're going to pull up anchor and move on to new horizons now, if I can wake her up. Before we leave, let me ask you, what's anchoring you? The time for innovation is always now, it always has been, and it always will be. On behalf of my furry colleague here, I want to thank you. Frances, we're going to go. Let's go, love. Let's go.